Thank you, Francisco. Appreciate it. And Yaki, for the opportunity to present our experience in the United States, how we might hope to see this incubation develop in other.
Okay, you can hear me. Thank you for that. Thank you for the introduction and invitation to present about the experience of national business incubation in the United States over the last 25 years. We have quite a history that I think is, we have quite a history, and the organization is comprised of some 2,000 members from 66 countries. We have about 980 members, member incubators from all the continents that really have been promoting business incubation over the last decade in particular. I think it's safe to say that business incubation is a bit of a movement. It's a new kind of infrastructure, knowledge infrastructure, that's beginning to compete more and more with physical infrastructure. And I'm happy to see that many countries' governments are allocating financial support and technical support. And indeed, some of the most exciting markets are in emerging markets like Pakistan and Bangladesh and Burundi. We're contacted from all over the world to advise on how to develop new incubators or incubation systems around the world. Increasingly, this is a global movement, and I'm excited to see that Spain is really committed to developing a national association, and it already has a significant amount of infrastructure in place to support entrepreneurs. But it's still just the beginning point. There's so much more to go. And I foresee a time when we're going to see business incubators in every community, and provides a fertile ground for launching entrepreneurs and creating new companies. A little bit of experience about business incubation in the United States. We have about 1,100 incubators in North America, Mexico, Canada, and the United States. In the last 10 years, the number of incubators have doubled. In 1980, there were only 15 incubators. So the growth is quite explosive. 94% are nonprofit organizations. There's a number of different motivations for creating business incubators. Chief among them is job creation. However, other reported motivations include creating more entrepreneurial climate, helping to commercialize new technologies, helping to diversify local economies, accelerate local industrial growth. Though it's important to note that industrial growth is changing. We're not focused on building manufacturing capacity as we used to. We're focused now on developing new technologies. And it seems to me that in the different countries that I've traveled to where we practice business incubation, more often than not, venture capital, angel investors, corporations, and certainly business incubators are focused more on biotechnology, green technology, ICT, but certainly innovation. And if it wasn't for creating jobs and developing the local community, I don't think many incubators would be created. What the idea is to create and retain businesses in the community. And after a while, if a company is incubated for 2 years, their families have children. Their children are going to school. Their children are going to want to leave a particular city. So it's a wonderful way to create local jobs and to develop a local community. Women in entrepreneurship, it's a significant motivation. Now, one of the challenges we face in rolling out standardized practices and best practices is that there's a lot of different perspectives about what constitutes an incubator. Some people might think of it as a brick and mortar facility, a building such as this. But it's quite a luxury to have this. In many instances, virtual incubation is more popular. or it's more practical. There isn't infrastructure to make use of. But in the United States, we tend to focus on these facilities. We find that this is the type of environment that makes the biggest impact for entrepreneurs. We tend to see incubators working with new companies, but increasingly existing firms, and business accelerators are a new kind of business incubator that's also quite legitimate. The incubator screens clients based on selection criteria, much like a venture capital firm might, when not with the same kind of strict perspectives, because we're getting into this business we're getting into businesses at much earlier stages than VCs do. We provide comprehensive business support services. We have usually technical assistance capability within the organization, but we also facilitate access to third-party services within the local community. So incubation provides a larger role. It helps to mobilize resources within a community. It helps develop the capacity of business service providers too. That's an important function. And we graduate companies from the program. So it's important that we keep them for a period of a year and a half or 2 years. We not keep them within the organization, within the incubator for too long, because then it crowds out other businesses that have a shot. This is the idea. We try and take some of the complexity out of being an entrepreneur. Being an entrepreneur is challenging. There's a lot of different things that compete for our attention. And the situation on the left here, that's what I faced when I started my companies. And it's a bother, to say the least. I would rather have somebody that facilitates my access to those resources. Now, in any particular market, you might see that there are different types of organizations that can be useful for an entrepreneur. Those that are nonprofit, or those that are for-profit, or those organizations that are more technical assistance oriented, or those that are more access to finance oriented. And what I've done for the United States here is I've shown the types of organizations that fall in each of those 4 quadrants. And the funding side, Small Business Administration provides about $600 million of funding to small businesses that's channeled through small business development centers. There's also corporate social investors, large companies that have nonprofit organizations that offer support. There's state and local governments. In the United States, the federal government plays a relatively smaller role in business incubation, and versus the state and local government provides a larger amount of funding to support small business. Non-government organizations, state and local governments also have advisory services that they provide. And I think that this is an important opportunity for other countries to learn about. I think the government has to play a leading role in providing both funding support and technical assistance to industry for economies to develop in a more rounded fashion to help entrepreneurs get through their most vulnerable period. Incubation plays a facilitation role in bringing these different stakeholders together. What kind of services do incubators provide? I know that many of you are incubator managers. I know that some of this is very clear to you all. But for those that aren't, certainly we provide help with business basics. We help open new markets to them, or open channels to important stakeholders. And typically an incubator manager might represent 40 companies. So whenever they travel, they are the spokesperson for their portfolio of companies they help. They help them formalize their marketing presence and develop a brand. Branding is one of the first investments a company needs to focus on. An entrepreneur needs to position itself in the market and how to articulate its position in the market. We help with corporate governance and financial management and access to capital. Universities have important resources, not the least of which are the students themselves. Providing internship opportunities for these students is both useful for the student as it is for the entrepreneur. And certainly standardized training programs and mentorship and coaching services are certainly common. then what we do is we then take a careful look at where the small companies' strengths and weaknesses are at, and we make applications to help round out their capabilities. On the right-hand side, I have a pie chart that shows the demand for services that was experienced by an organization in Pakistan that I headed. I founded a company for the government of Pakistan that was funded by the Asian Development Bank that paid for the purchase of services by entrepreneurs. And I think it's useful to see where demand is at among a large population of small companies. And our experience there, the greatest investment was making investments in information technologies and processes. 100% funding allocated to invest in technology and processing capability. Behind that was investments in marketing and sales, certifications, and establishing the credentials and the legitimacy of the organization, also important. In the United States, we're currently conducting a study that I'm hoping is going to put a similar reflection on how business incubators and entrepreneurs at an earlier stage than those we supported in Pakistan are making investments in different capabilities. And just to see a bit more clearly what the intention of business incubation is about, what we want to do is we want to apply strategic interventions at different stages of growing an entrepreneur that can make a difference to their sustainability. And it could be investments at first in a needs assessment or in a business plan to see where the gaps are at, and then interventions that focus on the brain and the like. And this is another view of the same story, but I like to talk about this in a general discussion about business incubation, because I like to think about business incubation as finding a kind of formal education and infrastructure for an entrepreneur and their organization. And if you think about business incubation as education, then it becomes a lot easier to lobby with during your fundraising efforts. When you're talking to government or you're talking to foundations, if you're referring to the fact that you can separate a company's incubation into different stages where you focus on classes, types of interventions, in groupings that might reflect years of a university degree. It's a metaphor that resonates with people, and it's clear. Another important function of business incubation is aligning the various stakeholders in their support of business incubation, because they may have a perspective about developing capacity of entrepreneurs, but until they're all marching in coordination together, then there's no resonance between them. And what I want to convey with this graphic is that in general, the most successful business incubators are those that have a strong champion, or a group of champions outside of the business incubator that are credible, senior, but listened to by important functional contributors to bring these together.